So let's say you have a great story. What do you do now? What do you do with the story? So stories are great for driving home a message in a very memorable and engaging type of way. And presumably, if you're speaking in public, if you've been asked to talk, most likely it's not some type of boring technical presentation where you're just going to go through computer code, or you're going to talk about air conditioner repair or something like that. Most likely you're going to be making a point, illustrating a message, influencing people, trying to get people to take action in some way, shape, or form. And every story, you can probably extract multiple points, multiple messages out of stories. Now, for example, in my story that I just told you, so you could talk about the power of persistence. This guy was persistent. I mean, he followed me 8 blocks down 8th Avenue into Port Authority, surrounded by policemen, to try to get something from me. That's persistence. You could also use it for a talk about what to do when you're faced with 2 undesirable choices. Right? I was not sure if I should stay and face whatever he had in store for me, or run and perhaps risk getting shot by him, or something like that. I don't know exactly what, but both of those choices were undesirable. Every story, you can probably extract a couple different points loosely. It doesn't have to be an exact match, but loosely enough so that it is memorable and engaging. And you can do this multiple times throughout your speech. So you're not limited to just leading with a story. You can have stories for almost every point that you want to make throughout your speech. And every time you tell another story, you hook the audience back in, you relax yourself a little bit more as you get lost in the story. There's a very good speaker that I know who used to tell tons of stories and jokes, and he would say, people would come home afterwards and their spouse would ask, what did you talk about? And all they would remember is the stories and the jokes, and then they would be able to piece back together the whole lecture. So do this in the beginning of your lecture, do this often. One last point that people have a lot of trouble with is, how do we get a story that matches my point? It's very nice that, maybe if I'm talking about the power of persistence, or talking about what to do when faced with undesirable choices, which choice to make, but very often I'm not going to be asked to speak about the topic of my story. So what I recommend is become a connoisseur of stories. Collect stories from your own life, from other people's lives, Reader's Digest, wherever you hear a touching story, something that really kind of hits a chord with you, strikes a nerve, I would hold on to those stories. And then, before you have to talk, whatever the topic is going to be, sift through your collection, through your library of stories, and look for points that you could pull out that will help you illustrate the points that you want to talk about in your lecture. Really what you're doing is you're working backwards, right? You're looking for a story, and then you're looking for a point to pull out in order to illustrate your message. So it's a great trick. No one will ever take you to task for telling stories during your lecture. People actually appreciate it. There's nothing worse than a boring speaker and a stiff speaker, someone who's just reading from notes. So if you lead with a story and you tell multiple stories throughout your speech, you'll really be able to engage, loosen up, and make memorable points that people will, long after the lecture is over, people will remember.